The boy stood at the edge of the stage, clutching an accordion that looked almost too big for his thin frame. Its worn leather straps hung loosely over his shoulders, and the bellows were patched in places with tape that had long since lost its stick. Under the bright lights, every flaw was visible. The audience noticed. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, not cruel at first, just curious, unsure. But then someone snickered louder. Another joined. Soon, it spread like a quiet wave across the auditorium. The boy didn't look up. Backstage, a stagehand whispered to another, an accordion. Seriously, on this show, out at the judge's table, Simon leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised. He had seen thousands of acts. Singers, dancers, magicians, even people doing things that barely qualified as talent. But an accordion, it felt outdated. He pressed his lips together, unimpressed. "What's your name?" one of the judges asked, her tone gentler than the room deserved. The boy adjusted his grip on the instrument. "My name is Mateo," he said softly. His voice carried a slight tremble, but his eyes, when he finally lifted them, held something steadier. "I'm from Davao." "Davao," another judge echoed, smiling politely. "That's in the Philippines, right?" Mateo nodded. Simon leaned forward slightly, resting his chin on his hand. "And you've come all this way, to play the accordion?" A few chuckles broke out again. Mateo swallowed, but he didn't look away. "Yes, sir." Simon's expression didn't change. "All right, let's hear it." There was no build-up, no dramatic music, just a boy, a battered instrument, and a room that had already decided what it thought. Mateo took a slow breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single note. It came out low and steady, not loud, not flashy, but clean. Clear. It cut through the lingering laughter like a blade. The room quieted, just a little. Mateo closed his eyes. His fingers began to move. The second note joined the first. Then a third. A melody started to take shape. Soft at first, almost hesitant, like a story whispering its opening lines. Somewhere in the audience, a woman tilted her head. That didn't sound bad. Mateo's shoulders relaxed as he played. The tremble in his hands disappeared, replaced by something else entirely, confidence, perhaps, or memory. The melody grew. It wasn't the kind of tune people expected from an accordion. It wasn't bouncy or comedic. It was haunting, emotional. Each note seemed to carry weight, like it had been pulled from somewhere deep inside him. Simon's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. Mateo opened his eyes, and then, he changed. The tempo picked up. His fingers flew across the buttons and keys with precision that didn't match his age. The bellows expanded and contracted like a living thing, breathing life into the music. The audience leaned forward. This wasn't just good. This was something else. The melody twisted, rising into something brighter, faster, then dipped suddenly into a minor chord that sent a shiver through the room. A man in the front row stopped mid-whisper. A girl who had been scrolling on her phone slowly lowered it. Mateo stepped slightly to the side, his body moving with the rhythm now. The instrument no longer looked too big for him, it looked like it belonged. Like it was part of him. The laughter was gone. In its place was silence. Not the bored kind, not the distracted kind, the kind that listens. Back at the judge's table, Simon had straightened in his seat. His eyes were locked on the boy. Mateo pushed the melody further. Now it was bold, confident, defiant. It was no longer asking for attention, it was demanding it. The notes cascaded like a waterfall, each one landing perfectly, building into a rhythm that felt almost impossible to maintain. Yet Mateo didn't falter. His fingers blurred. The audience could barely keep up. And then, he slowed it down. Suddenly, abruptly. The shift was so sharp it made several people gasp. The melody softened again, returning to something fragile, vulnerable. Mateo's expression changed. There was something in his eyes now, something heavy, something real. He wasn't just playing music anymore. He was telling a story of long nights, of empty rooms, of hope that refused to die. The accordion's voice trembled, almost like it was crying. In the third row, a woman wiped at her eye, surprised to find tears there. Simon didn't move. Mateo let the final note linger. It hung in the air, delicate and unresolved. For a heartbeat, the room stayed completely still. Then, He inhaled, and exploded into the final section. The tempo surged faster than before. Louder, stronger. This wasn't just music anymore. This was a statement. Every note struck with precision, every movement sharp and intentional. The melody climbed higher and higher, pushing toward something that felt just out of reach. Mateo leaned into it, his entire body engaged now. The accordion roared. It wasn't an old instrument anymore. It was powerful, alive, unstoppable. The audience erupted. Not in applause yet, but in energy. You could feel it building, like a storm about to break. Mateo didn't stop. He drove the music forward, faster, louder, bolder. And then, silence. He cut it off in a single, decisive motion. The final note snapped into place. Gone. The room froze. For a split second, no one moved. No one breathed. Even Simon Cowell, who had rolled his eyes just moments before, sat completely still. Silent. Then, as if the spell shattered all at once, the audience exploded. Cheers, applause, shouts. People jumped to their feet, clapping, yelling, some even laughing in disbelief at what they had just witnessed. Mateo stood there, chest rising and falling, his hands still gripping the accordion. He looked out at the crowd, almost unsure. Was that, for him? One of the judges was already on her feet, clapping enthusiastically. Another shook his head in amazement, grinning from ear to ear. And Simon, he hadn't clapped yet, he simply stared. Mateo's heart sank for a brief moment. Then Simon stood, slowly. The applause grew even louder. Simon brought his hands together, clapping, once, twice, then steadily, his expression no longer skeptical. It was impressed, genuinely. The noise in the room became deafening. Mateo blinked rapidly, trying to process it all. Just minutes ago, they had laughed. Now, they were cheering like he had just done something impossible. When the applause finally began to settle, Simon leaned forward, resting his hands on the desk. "Well," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "I did not expect that." A ripple of laughter passed through the audience, but this time, it was warm. Respectful. Simon continued, "When you walked out here, I thought this was going to be, let's say, very old-fashioned. Maybe even a bit boring." Mateo swallowed. Simon tilted his head slightly. "I was wrong." The crowd cheered again. "That wasn't just good," Simon said. "That was incredible." Mateo's grip tightened on the accordion. "You took something people underestimate," Simon went on, "and turned it into something powerful. You made everyone in this room listen. Really listen." Mateo felt his eyes sting. Another judge leaned in. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Mateo hesitated for a moment. "My grandfather," he said quietly. "He taught me when I was little." "And is he here tonight?" she asked. Mateo shook his head. "No, he passed away last year." A soft murmur moved through the audience. "But," Mateo added, his voice gaining strength, "this was his accordion." He lifted it slightly. The worn edges, the patched bellows. Suddenly, it didn't look broken. It looked meaningful. The judge smiled gently. "I think he'd be very proud." Mateo nodded, unable to speak. Simon leaned back again, but this time there was no trace of skepticism in his posture. "Mateo," he said, "you've got something very special. Not just talent, but heart. And that's what people remember." He paused. "And I think we're going to be remembering you for a long time." The audience roared. Mateo let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. For the first time since stepping onto that stage, he smiled. Not a nervous smile, a real one. As the applause continued, the camera lights glowed brighter, capturing every second of the moment. From the laughter at the beginning, to the silence in the middle, to the thunderous applause at the end, Mateo stood there, still holding the accordion that everyone had underestimated. The same instrument that had carried his grandfather's lessons. The same one that had nearly been dismissed before he even played a single note. Now, it had changed everything. Backstage, the stagehands who had whispered earlier were clapping along with everyone else. "Did you hear that?" one of them said, shaking his head. "Yeah," the other replied. "I'm never judging an accordion again." Out in the crowd, people were still on their feet. Some wiping tears, some laughing in disbelief. All of them changed in some small way by what they had just witnessed. And at the judge's table, Simon Cowell, known for his sharp critiques and unshakable demeanor, had been left with something rare. Silence. Not the dismissive kind, but the kind that comes when words aren't enough. The kind that only real talent can create. Mateo stepped back from the microphone, still smiling, still breathing in the moment. He hadn't just played music. He had proven something, that it doesn't matter what people expect. It matters what you bring. And on that stage, under those lights, with a battered accordion and a heart full of memory, Mateo had brought everything, and for a moment the entire world had listened.